Hello viewers, welcome to our channel Throwlight. In this video, let's understand obtaining an access token. An access token is a string that identifies the user, an application, or a page. The token includes the information such as when the token will expire and which app created the token. First, it is necessary to acquire Oauth 2.0 client credentials from API console. Then, the access token is requested from the authorization server by the client. It gets an access token from the response and sends the token to the API that you wish to access it. If you see the example here, it is the authorization endpoint. It has few parameters. Let's understand one by one. First one is client ID. It should be set to client ID of your application. Next one is redirect URI. It should be set to the URL. After the request is authorized, the user will be redirected back to this redirect URI. And the last one is response type. It can either be a code or a token. The code must be used for server-side applications, whereas token must be used for client-side applications. In server-side applications, you can make sure that the secrets are saved safely. Let's understand the concepts of client credentials. First one is authorization code. The authorization code will be issued by the authorization server, which allows accessing the authorization request and grants access to the client application to fetch the owner resources. The resource owner can be redirected to the client application with the authorization code by directing the owner to the authorization server using the client application. The important role of the authorization code is to authenticate the client and access the token directly without passing it to the owner's user agent. Now let's understand the process of authorization code. First, the user accesses the resources of the resource owner by using the client application. Next, the client application will be provided with the client ID and client password during registering the redirect URI. Then the user logs in via the client application on the authorization server such as Google, Facebook, Twitter, etc. The authenticating server redirects the user to the redirect URI using the authorization code, which the owner of the client application registers the redirect URI. After registration, the user accesses the redirect URI from the client application. The client application will be provided with the authentication code, client ID and client password and sends them to the authorization server. The client ID and client password is unique to the client application on the authorization server. The authorization server sends an access token to the client application. The user will be allowed to log into the client application. The user logs in and accesses the client application using these credentials via the authorization server. It then sends an access token to the resource server. Resource server is the server hosting these resources such as Facebook, Google, Twitter, etc., which verifies the access token. Next, the client application accesses the resources stored on the resource server. The resource server returns the resources to the client application. Next, the client application provides the resources to the user. This is the process of authorization code. Next one is refresh token. Refresh tokens are the credentials that can be used to acquire new access tokens. The lifetime of a refresh token is much longer compared to the lifetime of an access token. Refresh tokens can also expire but are quite long-lived. When current access tokens expire or become invalid, the authorization server provides refresh tokens to the client to obtain new access token. Let's understand the process of refreshing an expired access token. First, the client authenticates with the authorization server by giving the authorization grant. Next, the authorization server authenticates the client, validates an authorization grant and issues the access token and refresh token to the client if it is valid. Then the client requests the resource server for protected resource by giving the access token. The resource server validates the access token and provides the protected resource. The client makes the protected resource request to the resource server by granting the access token, where the resource server validates it and serves the request if it is valid. The step keeps on repeating until the access token expires. If the access token expires, the client authenticates with the authorization server and requests for new access token by providing refresh token. If the access token is invalid, the resource server sends back the invalid token error response to the client. The client authenticates with the authorization server by granting the refresh token. The authorization server then validates the refresh token by authenticating the client and issues a new access token if it is valid. Next one is resource owner password credentials. The resource owner password credentials include only one request and one response. This grant type is useful where the resource owner has a good relationship with the client when there are no authorization grant types available. The resource owner password credentials can be used to grant authorization to access the token. This type of grant type removes the storing of resource owner credentials for future use by exchanging credentials with the access token or the refreshing token. Let's understand some of the parameters of resource owner password credentials. First one is grant type. It is a required parameter used to set the password. Next one is username. It is a required parameter that specifies the resource username. Next one is password. It is a required parameter that specifies the resource owner password. Next one is scope. It is an optional parameter that specifies the scope of the request and authorization. If you see here, this is the JSON structure of resource owner password credentials. Let's understand one by one. Access token. It is a required parameter in which the authorization server accesses the token. Next one is token type. It is a required parameter which is assigned by the authorization server and specifies the type of the token. Expires in. It is a recommended parameter that specifies the duration of access token expiry. And the last one is refresh token. It provides a refresh token if the access token expires to get the new access token using the authorization grant. Last one is access token response. Access token is a type of token that is assigned by the authorization server. The authorization server issues the access token if the access token request is valid and authorized. If the token access request is invalid or unauthorized, then the authorization server returns an error response. The access token is given by the authorization server when it accepts the client ID, client password, and authorization code sent by the client application. Once the user receives the token, it can be sent to the access resources such as Facebook, Google, etc. to access the resources in the system related to the logged-in users. If you see here, this is the JSON structure of access token response. Let's understand one by one. Access token. It is a required parameter in which authorization server accesses the token. Next one is token type. It is a required parameter which is assigned by the authorization server and specifies the type of the token. Next one is expires in. It is a recommended parameter that specifies the duration of access token expiry. And the last one is refresh token. It provides a request token if the access token expires to get the new access token using the authorization grant. In our next video, we will see accessing a protected resource. If you like this video, please share with your friends and don't forget to subscribe our channel Throw Light.